Hello everybody and welcome back to Cherry Chunks, where I'm Cherry and I'm taking up a chunk of your time. Oh yeah. Anyway, you're probably looking at the title, it's going, part 5, what is it? What do you mean part 5? Well, we played the first 4 parts of this game as a live stream, and I will now be continuing Witch on the Holy Night with my terrible narrations and mispronouncings of things. And yeah. This episode might be a little short because I'm mostly trying to catch up to the end of the chapter. And then hopefully with that, each episode should be, each chapter, depending depending on how long each is. And we'll go from there. We'll go from there. So, where we last left off, we were fighting Alice. Because Alice was all like, she was not having none of this nonsense. And now there's a dragon-looking thing going through the sky. What could go wrong? The amusement park had reached the final stage of snarkification. It was not just the mascot characters that had been granted life. Like the burger joint, even the buildings had begun to transform. The roller coaster that made its way about the park wreathed and twisted like a Chinese dragon. Alko and Shojiro stared dumbfounded by the staring Ferris wheel, which had grown to over 250 feet in height. Hordes of red men closed in on them as if to offer tickets. Mobs of trinkets, actually kickshaws, rampaged this park. Whenever a hole was punched into the envelopment, it was instantly filled. It was a battle of attraction with no end in sight. But that was a matter of course, as there were few fairy tales that about limited resources.
なんかどうしようもないぞ。こいつら増える一方だ。
スナーク本体を探して。童話の怪物には本体に当たる器物があるの。それさえ壊せば遊園地から出られるはず。
本体ってどんな？
さっき言ったでしょ。童話の怪物は現実にないものだって。今までいなかったおかしなやつとか現実じゃありえないもの。それが本体。
Everything it's brand new to him.
おかしなやつって例えば。
だから
Yes, you do.
命のある人形とか空飛ぶゴーカートとか。
Alko paused her firing for a moment. After saying this out loud, she just realized how deep their grave was dug. The amusement park was a treasure trove of fairy tale-esque creatures on any given day. Who could say that it was impossible amidst a newly transfigured knickknacks running around? Knickknacks. That's a knickknack, right? Knickknacks. Yes, no one's here to stop me from saying things incorrectly now. Take that, Orgo. Anyway.
そっか。おかしくないやつなんて一つもないんだ。この中に紛れ込んでる。
Knick-knack, paddywhack, give a dog a bone. Hoping that she was wrong, Alko bit her bottom lip. Flat Snark was the type of ploy that deployed bounded field. Seeing it was commanding so many familiars, it would not be unusual for its main body to have little or even no defenses. Furthermore, if it was modeled from a story about it being untouchable and unidentifiable, it would be illogical to assume that it would collapse in on itself shortly after being discovered.
逆に言えば見つければ私たちの勝ち。そんな脆いやつが雑魚に紛れ込む。木の葉を隠すのが森の中って言うけど。
That was closer to the truth than Alko realized. As long as there was the slightest possibility of being hit by one of Alko's stray bullets, it would not dare appear in front of them. Its true form was orchestrating the park from somewhere safe.
でも どこかに見えているはず。スナークは本の主題だもの。常にページのどこかにいないと主人公の資格がない。
But where? Put it very simply, the Ferris wheel was the safest location in the park, as well as a symbol of his past glory, perhaps.
あの子を捕まえるのは
Her eyes opened wide at the sudden suggestion. While Akko had been trying to come up with a plan to overcome this stalemate, it seemed Shojiro had been racking his brain as well. His proposal was a simple one. If they could just find the Snark, they just needed to take out its master, Alice. Alice had not moved at all from the clock tower. Even from here, they could make out her figure draped in the moonlight.
それは一番ダメ。アリスを殺してもフラットスナークは止まらないし、このトンデモが外に溢れ出すことになる。だいたい私じゃあの子を殺せないから、よくて半殺しがいいところ。
A bread man, angered by the insults hurled toward his master, moved to attack and was mercifully burned to a crisp. The two stood back to back, catching their breath. With no plan to speak of and no route to escape, they had reached rock bottom. Meanwhile, the oddities were forming a circle around their prey, as if they smelled blood in the water. Were they to be dragged into a bakery for the oven? Minced in the meat grinder at the butcher shop? Skewered and paraded around atop the carousel? Walk the plank of a thorny pirate ship? After 2 years of slumber, they were eager to welcome their new guests.
一応聞いておきたいんだけど。
何？手短にね。今考え事してるから。
ああ、あの連中が何をしたいか嫌っていうほど伝わってくるんだけど、それってあの子の趣味なのかな。
その疑問はなかったわ。連中の人間嫌いは遊園地の怨念とフラットスナークの性格じゃない。基本的にまともなやついないから、アリスの使い魔って。あ、でも
Alko was unable to deny that there were some similarities.
それは結構。それで青崎の考え事って止める方法考えついたのか。
期待させて悪いけどお手上げ。ま、あんたが殺されれば止まるでしょうけど。
それは嫌だ。とりあえず逃げよう。
しずきくん
She blinked in surprise at the sudden turn of events. Shotaro, who had up until now been meekly following her lead, had grabbed Alko's hand and pulled her with him into a head-on charge of the swarm of bread in an attempt to break out of the encirclement.
意味わかんなすぎ。なんで今の流れでそうなるのよ、あんたは。
Alko nonetheless followed Shinjiro's uncharacteristically gung-ho lead and cursed him all the while. Alone, he had no chance of breaking through the surrounding wall of enemies with brute force. Alko regained her bearings and let fly a spray of magic bullets ahead of Shojiro. They burst through the net and ran as hard as they could. At this point, all there was left to do was what they had planned from the outset: get out of the park. But not before addressing what would needed to be addressed.
なんでよ、さっきはあんなに諦めよかったのに。
Alko could not begin to comprehend Shojiro's reaction.
ミラーハウスの時と今は違うだろ。いいから走れ。
He was okay with it because he wanted to be killed by you, Alko. It was fun.
違わないわよ。あんたを殺そうとした私も、あんたを殺したいアリスも、理由の結果も同じよ、私たち。
Though she wondered, blah blah blah. Though she wondered what was getting her so worked up, Alko did not stop. She told herself that the degree of Shojiro's stupidity, charging the breadmen so recklessly, had caused her to lose her cool.
あのね、一緒に逃げてるぐらいで勘違いしないでくれる？言っとくけど私、明日に会ったらまたあんたを殺しに行くから。死にたくないってんなら、ここで私からも逃げ出したら？
それはまた今度の話だろう。だいたい青崎に殺されるのならいいけど、あの子に殺されるのは嫌だ。
But what?
だからなんで？
だって顔も知らない、話したことさえない相手だ。
It was like someone had doused water over her blazing fury. Alco's anger was snuffed out by the absurd simplicity of his reasoning.
顔も知らないって。
Could it be that Shojiro did not mind being killed by someone so long as he had met them? Alco grimaced as she followed him. From her spot atop the clock tower, the girl observed the growth of her familiar. Flat Snark. A savior of the discarded. It was a vile, vulgar fairy tale monster who provided those abandoned by fate with a glimmer of hope before snatching it away. Alice had it under control, but she was still keen to keep the Snark from experiencing its bad habits. After completing a lap around the park that had now reached the size of an entire town, the Robin made its situation report.
そう。外を目指しているの。
It seemed Alco was prioritizing the safety of the boy. Even if it was resulted in wasting an entire day, choosing not to capitulate on a decision was very much like her.
青子のことだから、時計台ごと私を焼き払いに来るかと思ったけど。
The bluebird cheeped in response. Was it denying its master's portrait of Alco? Or agreeing that it was Alco's style to do exactly that? An outsider might interpret its interjections either way.
退屈？
Robin jumped at being addressed so unexpectedly. It chirped and flapped its wings like a flustered servant, frantic to say otherwise.
珍しく気があったわね。いいわ。せっかくのゲームだし、もう少しだけ盛り上げましょう。
Calmly, she pulled out a small object from her pocket. It was a dark gray Easter egg, and emanating from inside it was a ticking of a clock. The Robin knew it to be a ploy kickshaw, with a bad attitude far exceeding Flat Snark's, known to be among the best in one-on-one situations.
いってらっしゃい。称える時間は20分に設定したわ。いつも通り控えめに壊れてきて。
And together with the witch's breath, the egg filled with praise disappeared. Suddenly, a strong wind swept through the park. The worlds, I could have killed them all by myself, floated through the air. It was the disappointment of something enormous that was visible to all, yet overlooked. Alco and Shojiro continued their dash towards the boundaries, separating the park from the outside. The curio horde that stood in their way had reduced in number. The iron fence that separated the two from the outside world was just over 300 yards away. Fortunately, there were no particularly large buildings barring their path. If the Ferris wheel had stood in their way, that would have spelled the end, but thankfully it had yet to reach its full strength. The only thing that appeared before them were weak oddities that could be handled by Alco's simple magecraft. She would have said make it to the fence if only her lungs would allow it. Since Alco was utilizing the ample mana filled with the park, her tank of magical energy was nearly full. Moreover, the condition for her body circuit was steadily improving, to the extent that she would be able to unleash at least one all-out onslaught. Until something unusual was hovering above her field of vision. It was locked on Shojiro, hovering 10 feet above him, over to one side.
しずきくん、ちょっと。
ああ、さっきからついてきてる。
Shojiro had seemingly noticed it before Alco, hence his previous awkward glances toward the sky. In truth, it would have been a stranger for him to not notice the thing was practically glued to him. In terms of its size, the floating object measured about 3 feet in diameter. Titles covered its exterior, about which a multitude of spinning lights danced about.
卵かな。
Shojiro asked, not really sure what to call it.
卵？卵って言ったら割れる卵。
Her bullets bounced off like it was made of rubber. That trait, the ability to deflect all outside interference, confirmed to Alco the one thing that was undoubtedly a ploy kickshaw.
やっぱり外からのルールじゃ壊れないか。しずきくん、あれから絶対に目をそらさないで。いい。何があっても見続けること。視界の隅に入れとくだけでいいから。
ああ。
Alco picked up her pace as she barked orders. The Eggman who sat on the wall. He would crack, just as the tale spoke of. Nothing anyone could do or say would cause him to fall, but the moment they stopped looking, he would tumble down and break into pieces.
曰く王様の軍隊でも元に戻せない数の破片。
It was a Mother Goose poem, Humpty Dumpty. It was if Shojiro was its target, then the moment he averted his gaze, it would tumble and explode.
爆発するかどうかは知らないけど。
Either way, it was going to scatter something troublesome when it fell. Its oval shape and the keyhole adorning the front and writing inscribed upon it, it all made her anxious. If it was an egg, that meant it was going to hatch at some point. Even if he continued to stare, once the time came for whatever it was inside to come out, they would have even less ability to conserve their energy.
青崎、早すぎないか。あまり全力で走ると。
後のことは考えないで。いいからしずきくんは卵だけに集中して。
At this critical juncture, breadmen stepped out to join the egg and block their path.
邪魔！
Whee! The breadmen were marching forth in a grand battalion. At her level of firepower, Alka could have easily mowed them down. However...
肩焼きかこの！
If Snap failed to do the job, that meant it was time for her to put her crust to use. Draw, a formula-triggered bullet encased in a full wind jacket. If her previous shots were the equivalent of machine gun volley, then this was her artillery shot. The hard crust bread had absorbed her Snap with a dent, scattered the thousands of tiny pieces at her draw's torrent. Shojiro, no! You weren't paying attention to the egg! Of course, the destruction did not end with just the breadmen. What had once been a brick road had now thoroughly stripped of its pavement. The nearby stalls had been warped and twisted its steel skeletons. It was a spectacle that made Shojiro question what the greater obstacle to their escape was. The wall of breadmen or Alko's ability to lay waste to things.
ちょっとなんで距離取るのよそこ。そばにいないと危ないじゃない。 ほら、もっとこっち言っとくけど、あんたがあいつらに囲まれちゃったらアウトよ。私、人質とか意味ないタイプだし、そもそも区別して撃つとか、そういうのできないし。
That made a lot of sense to Shojiro. He not fully appreciated the part about hostages, but he got the gist of it.
つまり、今はどこであろうと危険なのか。
あんたね。
Offended though she was by a typical naive response, she could not help but be impressed. Shojiro was a straight arrow through and through. His eyes stayed firmly focused on the egg overhead, even amidst the chaos of the melee unfolding before him. Oh, I guess he
その
was a
分
good
なら安
boy.
心か。物分かりは悪いけど、一度言われたことはきっちり守るあたり。
そんなことより青崎、俺の気のせいならいいんだけど、さっきのパン。
まあね、あいつら少しずつ強くなってきてるわ。
Dun dun dun!
大量生産が軌道に乗ったんで、今度はクオリティアップをテーマにしたのかも。しずきくんでもお察しの通り、ここからは手強くなっていく一方よ。あのパンたちでさえ個体差が出てきたみたい
Red
だ
is
し、
dangerous.
考えたくないけど、そのうちジャム塗ったりレタス乗っけたり、果ては合体したりして。
Though she was joking, her eyes were dead serious. Shojiro shuddered at the thought of the situation growing even more dire.
じゃあ、そのうちミラーハウスの人形ぐらいに怖くなるのか。おい。
間違いなくね。そこまでレアなパンになったら、私も自分だけで手一杯になる。ところでしずきくん、ああいうのと喧嘩できる？
Shojiro shook his head, a look of complete aversion upon his face.
でしょ？なら急ぎましょう。いろいろ余裕ないんだから。
Alko took a quick deep breath and then began to sprint once again. Far in the distance, though, in the fog, the iron fence waited 300 paces away. As long as nothing happened, they would make it there in one piece. Shojiro followed after Alko, holding on to that all-convenient hope. But hope was something ever fleeting. In fact, it lasted not even 300 yards. The edge of the amusement park may well have been the edge of the world. Dozens of undulating horrors could be seen. I don't know this word. Crowding the sky like a giant cloud or a thick curtain, or perhaps groaning lips. It was the end of the road, the outer limit of the outrageous and fantastical realm, and yet Alco found it to be much like the last page of an enormous picture book. The sight turned her mind blank. Well, this is about as bad as it gets, she thought. The Snark, this island of despair, had at last brought Alco to her knees as she stared at the swelling border. The park had indeed had an end. Even now, Alco and Shojiro had expected a fence divided the amusement park from the residential area neighboring it. It had both doubled in height and been made sturdier, another hurdle she had foreseen before even laying eyes on it. Expecting it to have been snarkified, Alco had come prepared to demolish an obstacle or two. But this construction before her went beyond a mere wall. It was an ocean that separated the underworld from the mortal world one. The iron fence was like a restless, surging sea. 1 or 2 walls could easily be toppled. Even 10 or 20 could be dealt with one way or another. Between the power left in her body and that which filled the park, putting on a brave front was within her power. She could fully mobilize her circuits and her crest to the point of burnout in a last-ditch effort, like some reenactment parting of the Red Sea.
でも、それで終わり。
Even if the path could be opened, she would not have the energy left to walk it. And it was obvious what would become of her afterward. The residents would hardly forgive her for wreaking such a havoc around the park. Like ants drawn to honey, they would swarm the helpless girl and tear her to pieces. Despondent and exhausted, she felt the faint sting of remorse. Escaping the park. Looking back on how they'd gotten here, Alco recognized that her choices had been her undoing. Under the golden full moon, beams of steel bent and merged like wireframe sculptures. It was only a matter of time before the amusement park itself became one colossal monster. The horde of familiars gathered in the plaza where Alice was had formed an impenetrable blockade around her. Just above the head of the boy beside her, with a whispering egg called Scratch Dumpty, continued to shuffle in what appeared on its surface.
Aozaki!
Shizuki-kun.
The boy's voice snapped Alco out of her trance, if only for a moment. The stark reality of the situation quickly dawned on the novice mage. The sheer hopelessness of it all was ripped out and snatched away, any will she had to resist.
ゲートに行こう。ここはどうしようもないけど、入り口ならもうちょっとマシだろ。フラットスナークだっけ。こいつにもルールがあるって言ったじゃないか。なら、これは役割の問題だ。初めから鉄柵は通れない壁だけど、ゲートなら出入り口として機能しているかもしれない。
Shojiro had not given into panic. Alco found herself honestly admiring Shojiro's ability to analyze Snark's characteristics given the circumstances. Now calm, she stilled her resolve.
そうね。確かに門はあると思う。けど、たどり着くのは難しいわ。一番弱かった焼きたてパンですら、広場や入り口にはもっと上等なのがたむろしてるだろうし、門だってあの観覧車以上の怪物かもしれない。確か大きなキッツィちゃんだったでしょ。
青崎はゲートには行かないのか。
まあね。それよりこっちの方が現実的だし。
Alco took another glance at the undilating. It's undilated. Look at all the look at the berries. It's crazy, guys. The iron fences. It was too late to achieve their goal of making it out alive. In that case, she decided to prioritize the other promise she had made.
今からこの鉄柵を壊すから、あなたはそこから外に出て。それで、私の役割はおしまいよ。
Though her words were few, her tone told the story. She was telling him to escape by himself.
信じられない。こんなの青崎だけじゃ壊せないだろ。
私だけならね。でも、今はこの遊園地が味方してる。燃料がこれだけあるんだから、私は重心になるだけでいいんだし。ま、 それでも1回が限度だから、穴を開けたらあんたには全力で走り抜けてもらうしかないけど。
It literally does. She would carve a path through the iron sea of fences, gambling on one final effort, a great incantation to launch the biggest projectile she could manage. As an outsider, Shojiro could not even begin to imagine just how much of a burden this would be for her. All he could imagine was a hazy vision of Aoko being left behind in the park. What would happen to her? Would that girl in black come to save her? Cruel as it was to imagine, he knew she would not. After Aoko exhausted her very best shot in order to save him, that girl would not stay her hand. The only way Alice would let Aoko off the hook was if Aoko kills Shojiro as payment. And so...
20メートルぐらい離れてて準備に手間取るけど、その卵の表面が茹で上がるまでには終わらせるから。
It went without saying that this was the only path.
待ってくれ。俺を逃がすって言うけど、それに意味はあるのか？
ないけど、外に出られたところでアリスから逃げ切れるとは思えないし。けど、これぐらいは最後の意地よ。守るって言ったんだから、できるところまでやらないと。
Surprised by her seemingly moral stance, Shojiro saw Aoko in a new light. Ah, she's stubborn. But of course, Shojiro realized that she was not fighting for his sake, but for the sake of her pride. Ah, she's stubborn.
そうだったな。
She's stubborn.
けど、それなら俺だけ逃がすのはらしくないぞ。
何よ。いいから離れてて。
I'm gonna carry you. Aoko eased off just a bit. She recalled how an hour ago he had gotten the better of her.
青崎、まだ意地を張れるんなら他のことをやろう。このお化けみたいな鉄柵を壊せるなら他に壊すべきものがあるはずだ。
ないわよ。悪いけど、私は目に見えるものしか壊せないの。最後まで形のない希望にすがるとか考えるのも寒気がする。いい？今はフラットスナークなんかよりこの壁を壊してあんたを足抜けさせるのが私の現実。私に負える最大限の責任って。
逃げるのか？
Aoko was just about to turn her back on him when Shojiro clutched her hand. His words caused something inside her to boil with rage. It was as though someone had set her heart on fire. The surprise that pricked open her true feelings and the disappointment that she felt toward herself thawed her frozen limbs.
誰が逃げるのはそっちで、逃がしてあげるのはこっちだって言うのよ。甘く見ないで。いざとなったら遊園地ごと爆破してみせるわ。
Yeah, do it.
そうか。ならここで俺を逃がすのは無駄だな。その気迫は本命のために取っておこう。それまでは俺も手伝うから。
は？手伝う？それこそ無駄な気遣いよ。あったまきた。いいから逃げろバカ。だいたい走り詰めで息も絶え絶えなやつなんか使えないわよ。
そりゃいい加減ヘトヘトだけど、そういう青崎なんか疲れ以上に傷の方が傷んでるだろ。
Not to mention the injury on her back that Aoko had nearly forgotten about. Even now, she couldn't ignore the pain that the automaton had inflicted on her spine. With the iron will, she'd managed to push it out of her mind mostly.
ほら、魔術とか抜きにすればまだ俺の方がマシじゃないか。入り口までおぶっていくことぐらいならなんとか。
できないことは口にしないで。もういいから言って。慣れているもの、私は。でもあなたは違う。だからいいの。
The fact that they were a team, the fact that she would still have to kill him after all this. None of the irony was lost on her as she said these words. It didn't matter anymore. Still, Shojiro didn't let go of her hand. He gripped it even harder. His expression was the same as ever. Aoko frowned, trying to figure out if he was upset with her.
確かにこういうのは初めてだ。けど山じゃ危険な目ぐらい合ってる。鹿に襲われたことだってあるんだぞ、俺は。
He's been attacked by a deer. It's crazy. It was a deer. It was a girl, and she started singing, and there was a song playing in the background. It was going shika noko 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 koshitanta. As a city girl, she had no idea what it meant to be attacked by a deer, but determination was apparent enough. True, Looking back on it now, he had maintained his composure through it all. A normal person would barely be able to talk through such panic. Blah, blah, blah. Perhaps growing up in the mountains, far from civilization, had taught him how to stay calm in the face of so much.
だから信じてくれ。少しでいいから。
He spoke his plain, unadulterated feelings and released his hand. There was no lie in him. In fact, he was too honest, so much that she found it hard to believe him. Sojiro had no reason to go that far. As it stood, Aoko had no future. After convincing this and telling him to escape, why did the boys still offer to help a person like her?
わからない。どうしてそこまでするの？私に付き合えてあなたは死ぬのよ。これが最後だからちゃんと考えてよね。あなたはここで逃げるべきよ。
Likes you.
それはわかるよ。でも行かない。
Shojiro answered immediately, realizing that Aoko was looking for his reason. This level of insight in Shojiro demanded a round of applause.
そうすると、青崎が死んでしまいそうだ。
His words were irrational as always.
だからどうしてそこまでするのよあんたは。
He likes you. She was yelling out of frustration. After thinking for a moment, Shojiro replied.
そりゃ、君が好きだからだろ。
Oh, he said Tsuki. Simple and to the point. Her face seemed to ask why, and she wouldn't even question him so. There was a pause, no more than 2 seconds. The surprise attack had stopped Aoko in her tracks. Alice was not the only one who had an ace up her sleeve. The line reached deeper than Flat Snark could ever hope to. All Aoko could respond was an expression of pure shock. It was a simple, stubborn reason, the strongest kind on earth. Shojiro Shuki was indeed incomprehensible, able to work unconditionally with someone who was trying to kill him. But she felt as though she finally grasped a sliver of his true nature. Tobimaru and the others' assessment of him were correct, as vexing as it was for her to admit.
バカね。私はあなたのこと嫌いなのに。
No, you don't. You like him. He laughed at her sour grumbling. At this point, he was used to her insults. The clash of wills ended here. Aoko's blood ran hot from her blazing heart. If he was going to make the face like that, all she could do was try to think of a way to get them both home.
私だって逃げっぱなしは性に合わないし。いいわよ。最後まで粘ってみる。それにしずきくんが付き合ってくれるなら、何かの役には立つでしょ。
Though her tone had lightened, there was still a hesitation in her eyes. It was only natural Aoko had not even a clue of how to begin to fight the snark. If only she had just been a bit more skilled or had trained just a bit more, there might have been some way to look for it.
我ながら情けない。せめて正体を暴く手がかりでもあればいいんだけど。
Unconsciously, she had let her apprehension show. Sniveling was pointless. She would just have to figure it out by herself, but...
ん？なんだ？正体さえ分かればいいのか？
え？
Aoko gave him a look as to ask what that was supposed to be.
いや、だからおかしなものはどれかってことだろ。
Chojiro also made a face and suggested she should have brought it up sooner.
わかるのあんた。
多分。いや、結構前から気になっていたんだけど。
Chojiro whispered in her ear quietly as not to be overheard. It was certainly unexpected, but then again equally obvious after he explained the mistake. She knew right away that he was correct. At least she had an inkling of that Snark's original form, namely... They strategized for 10 minutes. After deliberating the Snark's true form and figuring out a plan of attack, the two exchanged nods in acceptance of their roles.
それじゃあ、ここからは別行動ね。でも、ミラーハウスの時みたいなのは勘弁してよ。この作戦の肝はあなたなんだから。開始1分でドジったら、本当に打つ手なしだからね。
Though she jabbed him for his previous failure as a decoy, her voice was bright. Aoko's original vigor had returned to her at Shochiro's discovery of the truth. Meanwhile, Shojiro was also getting serious in his own way. He took Aoko's warning to heart.
ならいいけど。いい？さっきと立場は反対よ。失敗したら死ぬのは私じゃなくてそっち。もうフォローに回れないから、できるだけ慎重にね。
分かってる。今更ながら、やっぱりさっき逃がしてもらえばよかったと思うぐらい。
Shojiro nodded, telling her to leave it to him, though he made it sound like he was holding a grudge. It seemed to him the only way of showing her his resolve. Aoko let a sigh of defeat. Once more, she couldn't figure him out.
ほんと、大バカなんだか大物なんだか。
What is
でも
happening?
任せた。期待してるわ。
You got this, girl. She had wanted to say that she believed in him, but apparently that was too embarrassing for her. Aoko turned away from Shojiro and began to run. She began to think that maybe this change of pace was not so bad after all. And so ended the intermission. The young cast members were handed their new lines. Whatever happens next, the Night of Witches had, at long last, entered its climax. Woo. That it? Is that the end of the chapter? Oh, no, we're still going.
別行動？あの二人が。
She was filled with foreboding at the Robbins report. Apparently they had gone in opposite directions. The park's residents had set off after the boy witness, and it would take them mere minutes to capture him, so the bird said.
どういうこと？追いかけているのは本当に彼？青子が変装しているのではなく。
The robin flapped its wings, chirping away any doubt. It had seen them with its own two eyes. Aoko was heading for the plaza, while the cocky brat was making a run for the roller coaster.
青子が彼を見捨てた？そんな簡単なことならいいけど。ダンプティは彼に張り付いているの？
The robin nodded enthusiastically. It didn't know about the other birds, but with its superior night vision, it had seen that sucker clearly because he had moved to a high point.
ダンプティはなんて？最後まで歌わせろ。こんな褒め殺したい間抜けはまたとない。ですって。
Scratch Dumpty was a ticking time bomb that would drop and detonate the moment its target averted its gaze. That is, as long as this target continued to observe him in a way, he was a gentlemanly ploy kickshaw, though Alice wished she would forego such niceties when in battle.
そうね。視線を切らないだけではダンプティからは逃げられない。表面の死が完成すれば扉が開く。彼がどこまで逃げようと、あと少しでダンプティがしまってくれるわ。
Until the park, or rather the snark, was destroyed, Jojiro would not be able to escape, which meant the larger concern was Aoko. Aoko had promised to protect the boy, which begged the question, where was she running to?
ここにいる限り、青子の動向はつかめない。
Alice looked over the park, ignoring the robin's attempt to get her attention with its plumage. Flat Snark had nearly reached its full size. It was a different breed of beast compared to the other cheap ploys. To her, it was one of her three most irreplaceable and precious familiars.
そうね。任せたわ、スナーク。青子が諦めない以上、あなたも手は抜かないで。
Alice remained where she was. With the same historical merit as a troll under the bridge, the poison-clawed reptile Flat Snark was one of Alice's ultimate ploys. She was placing her trust in its reputation and ability.
でも忘れないで。これはゲームよ。勝敗がついたのなら、私のところに帰ってきて。
The drifting fog ignored its master's words. It was the one thing that Alice had misread. Flat Snart was a king, even among the other ploys of terrible, vulgar antics. Death to the defeated, gruesome tragedy to the vanquished. It found no pleasure unless it brought about a dramatic ruination of life and wealth. The fog bellowed like wicked laughter. After all, only a king had the right to decide the fate of the vanquished, and the Snark's greed could not be contained. Thus, it hadn't even the slight intent to play fair despite its master's orders. Oh no! Alice's familiars going out of control. Over 100 feet high, one careful step at a time, the figure made its way gingerly up the track, which stretched into the heart of the amusement park. He stayed his beating chest and the pounding of his breath. Even tiny movements were an obstacle to his progress. Amazingly, the one making this pale-faced adventure higher and higher was Shojiro Suzuki. Far below, he saw the horde of bread creatures had congregated by the roller coaster platform. As they bustled their way in that, their numbers continued to increase by the minute, seemingly cheering on Shojiro with raised arms as he made his ascent. Or rather, they jeered as if beckoning him to come down.
助かった。あれ、高いところは苦手なんだ。
Of course, neither did Shojiro, but his current state was the lesser of two evils. The only thing that followed him now was a floating egg. After heaving a huge sigh, Shojiro bent forward and climbed the track that inclined towards the heavens. 150 feet now. If this were a skyscraper, he would be on the 16th floor. A strong gust of wind wafted through his hair. Humans had a sexual fear of heights. In particular, a place like this, which called forth visions of falling to one's death, would cause a person's knee to tremble against their will. It was an instinct that forewarned death, urging its master to return to the safety of the ground. It was a reasonable reaction. Climbing the roller coaster tracks went beyond funny stories and into the realm of fantasy. The strong winds and changing of air pressure were a hindrance. His instincts screamed at him to stop, causing his limbs to go numb, his muscles go limp, and his mind to race. Even if he had been tied to a lifeline, a mere 15 feet of climbing would still have caused his thoughts to freeze out of sheer terror. And it would only get worse from here, exponentially so. Every foot forward increased the load on both his mind and his body by another degree.
よし、頂上まであと少し。
The burden on his mind notwithstanding, he carefully measured the toll on his body with every step. His legs, which had carried him running this far, threatened to buckle the moment he let down his guard. The fatigue, which likely why Aoko had stressed that Shojiro's role was more dangerous than hers.
待てよ。逆を言うと、疲れてなければなんとかなると思ってたんだよな。
Shojiro laughed as he stared at the floating egg. He reflected on the course of events that had led him to the absurd situation. Not even 10 minutes ago, they had been engaged in the conversation.
じゃあ次ね。正体が分かった以上、あとはどう壊すかを話し合いましょう。
Shojiro felt a shudder traveling down his spine and Aoko's smug grin. In hindsight, Aoko had been more happy about this point to make him do something absurd.
どう壊すかって、それなら。
Shojiro wondered aloud at what he'd seen. Aoko, as though fire power could tear clean through the fence. He refrained from speculating about Flash Snark's true form because he felt that there was nothing they could do about it, even if they knew. But that had changed. For Aoko, the impossible was quite literally within her grasp.
そうでもないわ。私の目算だと、あと50メートル分、ギリギリで届かない。
Despair filled Shojiro's eyes. Aoko lifted her hand to her long hair with a magically charged fingertip and clipped a clean tuft of it.
足りない分は努力と根性ってね。あなたはできるだけ高いところまで逃げて。頃合いを見て合図を出すから。そうしたらこれを空に放ってくれる？
But based on where Aoko pointed her gaze, she did not really mean to leave it up to Shojiro to pick the highest place he could find. She was staring conspicuously at one of the amusement park's two main attractions, the roller coaster.
つまり、青崎とは別行動をとって、あの怪物たちに追われながら。
そういうこと。ほら、あのうねうね動き出してるコースターのレールとかよくない？
There were two demons in this park. Her smile made Shojiro want to respond that it was far from perfect.
疑いたくはないんだが、本当はあの子とグルで俺を遠回しに殺そうとしてるんじゃないか。
あら、私に殺されるのならいいんでしょ？
人の出現を悪用するのは良くないと思う。
Shojiro had hung his head. This was not sane. If he did as she said, he would die from exhaustion before Kitsy even had a chance to eat him.
私だって鬼じゃないわ。ほら、こっち向いて。おまじないかけてあげる。
It was the lightest of touches, close enough for their breath and their skin to come in contact. Ooh.
Oh.
CG! He finished with a hushed voice. For one of them, this was a rather mundane magecraft. For the other, it was head-spinning, intimate ambush.
軽く、弱く、うまく、早く。チクタクチクタク、急げや急げ。
Words that could not be produced by a normal larynx carried a peculiar weight to them, reverberated against his eardrums. If words were given colors, there would have been the color of her name, blue. Shojo's exhausted body and burning blood gently cooled.
飛ぶ、泳ぐ、駆け抜ける。チクタクチクタク、汽笛を鳴らせ。星はいつでも北の空。どこまでも。
In reality, it took but a few seconds, but the sudden contact had felt a little longer.
よし、暗示成功。成功したはず。ここまで手応えがあったの初めてだし、アリスの小言もたまには役に立つじゃない。
The very merry Alco stood aside a very confused Shojiro. After he asked what the heck had occurred, she responded,
簡単な暗示よ。一時的に恐怖心を消しておいたから、高いところに登っても平気なはず。あの手の作業で一番足を引っ張るのは同様でしょ。恐怖も何も感じなければ、地上何メートルだろうと平均台とそう変わらないってわけ。
He seemed to get it. It actually all sounded like Greek to Sojiro, but he accepted it as an explanation for their strange actions. He arrived at the summit of the track. From nearly 200 feet high, Shojiro had a bird's eye view of the entire amusement park. He was able to spot Alco's figure right away. In the plaza not so far from here, she seemed to be occupied with something conspicuous. Her surroundings lay still. The breadmen were still busy trying to figure out how to reach Shojiro by trial and error from the roller coaster's entrance. They were over 300 feet away now.
汗をかくはずだ。こんなに移動したのか。
The strong winter gales quickly dried the sweat from his brow, but he was drenched underneath his shirt. So much sweat was worth at least half-mile run, not to mention all the scares he had experienced throughout the night.
でもよかった。あとは合図を待つだけだ。
He felt a wave of relief. Not at the thought of Alco destroying the Snark in this nightmarish park. He was simply happy that he could repay a bit of the debt from the House of Mirrors. A blue bullet rose from the plaza where Alco was located.
合図だ。
Shojiro stood up at the top of the tracks, pulled out the pouch he had stowed in the pocket, and tossed it forward. Without any regard for the questionable footing, he gave a mighty overarm pitch. The small pouch drew a perverted curve in Alco's direction, quickly becoming untied in midair. Inside the bag was a lock of her hair and a small stone weight.
高いところから風に乗せてくれれば、あとは何とかするから。
Alco had said, but Shojiro's effort that had set the plan in motion. A tuft of hair remained airborne, drifting as it washed over its owner. Shojiro's job was done. He remained concerned about the egg hovering over him, but there was nothing he could do about it. Shojiro breathed a sigh of relief and leaned forward to watch the rest of the plan unfold, but then... the corner of his eye, he thought he spotted something familiar approaching Alco. Dun, 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 dun. What could it be?
ルート、セット。ディレクト、一掃、 2層予備に3層魔力提供体現に固定循環よし射角よし術式安定大まかよし
Pattern began to carve itself into the brick street. Casting of unprotested incantation with unprecedented rage. Keeping the rising intention contained within her chest, the fledgling mage snapped her fingers.
決めたツアープランスターマイン
She kneeled at the center of the formula and raised her hand into the night sky. Not even a glimpse of the transmogrified fantasy land around her entered her vision now. Only one thing, one untouchable thing was reflected in her blue eyes.
実はずっと気になっていたことが。
This is how their conversation started a few minutes prior. Shojiro began with a simple statement of fact. In truth, it was really the simplest of discrepancies. Any difference between the reality of an hour ago and the illusion of the present was both infinitesimal and infinite.
雲があったから勘違いしたんだろうけど。
It was hiding in plain sight. Too impossible to be real, too outlandish to be here. In this amusement park, where every paradigm had shifted, something was brazenly flaunting its normalcy.
今夜は新月なんだ、青崎。
思えば初めっからその形だったものね、あんたは。
The distance from the Earth to the Moon was 238,900 miles. It was truly identical to the actual. If it truly identical to the actual moon, then this monster indeed lived up to its eerie reputation. At a distance of that vast, that would have been no need to hide. It could flaunt its true form for all to see. But if it had to hide its true form, that meant it was vulnerable. The monster's camouflage implied that it sat within reach of human hands.
こっちの最大射程はよくて600ってところだけど。
At this point, it was time to give it all she had. Drawing the energy surging throughout the park, she extended her firing arm. Blue firework launched into the air. Looking up at her hair dancing by the window, Alko reached out her hand as to catch the night sky. A mage's own body made for the perfect catalyst. As for a female mage, the hair she had grown out over the many years made for a practically valuable and powerful source of fuel. To use it, all she had to do was apply her will. She locked her fingers on both her hands together and shouted,
三層展開全術式連結起動
She hurled forth a clear challenge to bind the moon to herself. And the mist began to whirl about in a vortex. The monster high above bore its fangs at the sight of the blue spell that appeared in midair.
見抜かれたですって
By the time Alice had noticed the change, the hostility between Alko and the Snark was palpable.
そうなら青子の勝ちよすぐに戻りなさい確かに雨雲を消したのはヒントの上げすぎだけどそれぐらいは多めに見てスナーク
The fog continued to thicken with no sign of abating. The moon that floated the night sky could not pardon such an insolent mage. As if the Lord of the Night would bow down to such impudence, there was no staying its wrath the challenge of so flagrant.
スナーク
Robin swooped in to give a report, but Alice waved it away. Her gaze was fixed on the transforming golden moon. And the cow jumped. Her calls of restraint did not reach it. This fairy tale monster was beholden to nobody and had no calms, unleashing its vast might upon its puny prey. The core of her magic bullet howled. The magic circuits within her body spun. Alko fed the magical energy, scorching her nerves with an imaginary flame. She was linked to the formula inscribed on the ground. The spell was read and executed the same way as it always was, but its output was beyond reckoning. With this much firepower, even the mundane success would invite injury upon its caster. It was enough to burn the nerves that were acting as the barrel.
でもいける。
Her imaginary heat had reached a terrifying temperature. Alko trembled at this endless feeling, but it would have to grin and bear it at least for the efforts to come to naught. Alko could no longer move. When she had learned the Snark's true form from Shojuro, she gave up any superiority a movable turret offered, instead opting to become a stationary cannon. That was the only way she could reach it. It was impossible to hunt the Snark unless she anchored her crest at the location and angle. At the same time, this action revealed that she was out of options. Once the fuse was lit, she would have no choice but to fight to the bitter end. Alko took a deep breath. This was the way she wanted it. Her preparations were complete. She would be able to deliver this maelstrom of magical energy directly to the moon like a rocket payload. Okay. The third mid-air layer served as the cannon's muzzle and sight. It would fire the magical energy once it reached critically, and it allowed Alko to adjust the angle of fire. The moon became warped with her scope. As Alko charged her magical energy, the ploy displayed its golden form as if to mock her. Come, worship the heavens, powerless scion of an innocent bloodline. For there it was, a point among the otherworldly sky, a mystical vision obfuscated. Words by jade mists and azure clouds, called the greatest treasure known of the world of magecraft, a rarity more valuable than the entire kingdom, crowned phantasm. Oh, look at that thing go.
Flat Snark.
Look at it go. Set apart from the first, the world's greatest fabrication. Her instincts screamed at her to delay no further. The fairy tale monster was the greatest of all of its kind and was about to expose its true form. Its open hostility made it clear that it was ready to counterattack. She had to shoot it down first. Magical energy was at 80%. The formulator was operating normally. All that was left to pull the trigger, but a calm voice inside her head asked if that was really okay. She had one shot at this, and there was no going back. It was a battle of precision, with no room for miscalculations. Even a tenth of a second of hesitation would tip the scales. Was she ready for that pain? Was she ready to deal with the fallout if she missed? Could she really even take down the moon with such a tiny bullet in the first place? Her eyes fixed upon the moon were filled with determination. She knew that the moment she fired, the intense recoil would overwhelm her entire body. Still, she shouted. With every ounce of spirit she possessed, she fired her ultra-long-range projectile into the sky. Third layer embraced the magical bullets fired from the surface of the earth. The crest and extension of Alko's stealth unleashed light and pierced the moon. However, an enormous blue canopy pulverized the beam. It returned the ether that 3,000 degree flame to nothing as if it came in contact with the bullet. The recoil of the Grand Magecraft literally boiled her arm. Her body couldn't handle it. Her heart stopped. Her brain went numb from the pain and impact. Her nerves petrified from the end to end. But her magic crest revived them all by force. Even though her vision had gone white, she could still see it. Swallowing the blood in her mouth, Alko looked up with a scowl. There it was, an enormous shield device and a sneering, deformed skull.
ちでもいい。一層、二層、再起動。急いで。
There was no time to think or hesitate. The magical energy throughout the park had begun to gather. Alco knelt across from the tyrannical face of the moon. She initiated that the ice had yet to fully form. Flat Snark still hadn't reached its full strength, which is exactly why.
まずい、まずい、まずい、まずい。
By accelerating the spell, Alco damaged her own body. The burden of linking the formula to the Snark caused intense pain. All she could do was grit her teeth and endure it. All because...
あの氷、私のマックスよりもっと上だ。
Alco had gotten a read on their relative strength. Even if its volume magic energy was identical, Snark's form, its mystic scale, was in a different league. Alco could charge her energy to her absolute limit, and that would barely make a dent in the ice wall. Meanwhile, there was nothing she could do to prevent her own annihilation if the Snark gathered as much energy as it could.
ならその前に。
She loaded her next shot. She issued orders to the floating third layer. Ignoring the total on her body, she began accelerating the first layer formula. The role of her right hand's single layer was to absorb and store the surrounding magical energy. The thick fog that drifted throughout the park was an ancient ether spewed out by Flat Snark's own body, but Alco could pour it into her own formula. Alco's body, which had integrated with the formula, took an amount of magical energy that far surpassed its maximum capacity. It seethed in agony, or rather, it trembled in delight. For a mage, magical energy was propellant to reach the realm of mystics. This expansion of internal time, the liquefaction of the self, the release from the physical, they were all that one might call a near-death experience. On the precipice of what lay beyond, Alco stood firm and faced reality. Still, reality had come to break her will. The gap between them was plain to any observer. The gun barrel named Alco Ozaki had not a chance to chip away at the lump of ice. She accelerated the spell further. The skull grinned. That ice was no shield. It was a hammer to crush the mages who did not know their place. The moon laughed as it prepared to crush not just Alco, but the boy atop the roller coaster, as well as the park in its entirety. Her circuits were on the verge of going critical. Her body had been charged with a scorching power supply from her fingertips to her eyeballs. She would see the bullets fired. She would arrange the magecraft formula as quickly as her nerves' transmission speed would allow. A single attack was not enough. There was no way to shoot it from its flank, which meant that there was only one solution.
Select. Alternate.
The third layer began to transform. It switched from direct to an alternating current. The spell's supposed strong point was the ability to adjust its trajectory mid-flight, but not right now. All she wanted was numbers.
Set. Octagram. 全回走。ぶん回せ。 A blue shine shined down upon the amusement park. Beams of light at their maximum output streaked forth to pierce the golden moon. Do you think she could go beyond Ultra, guys? Holding down the trigger, she continued to fire, taking in energy ad infinitum. Ad infinitum. Ad infinitum. Infinity. Wow, this is longer than I thought. I think I'm gonna call it quits here. This is... This is very long. Jesus. Very long chapter, very long. Alright. I'll see you guys for the next episode. Bye-bye. Oh, and before I go, make sure you leave a like and a comment in the session. If you made it this far, comment your favorite
Your favorite nonsense word from your favorite fairy tale. Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.